They still talk about the night the mountain swallowed 300 soldiers. But if you listen closely, really listen, you can hear the soft echo of a single rifle shot that didn't come from any enemy rifle. It came from the woman who refused to let those mountains keep what wasn't theirs. And before you hear the full truth, before you hear how one sniper changed the ending of a story already carved in stone, go ahead and like and subscribe if you believe courage is often quiet, often unnoticed, and sometimes blonde-haired and 28 years old. Because what happened in Devkur province wasn't a myth or a legend. It was a moment carved out of impossible odds. And it begins with Staff Sergeant Lily Harper standing alone at the forward observation post long before the sun realized it was morning. The ridge she occupied was a jagged line of crushed shale, barely wide enough for her to lie prone with her rifle. But she preferred it that way. Narrow places sharpened instincts, funneled focus, forced clarity. Even at 28, Lily had the kind of composure that made older officers nervous. She didn't flinch, didn't chatter, didn't boast. She breathed in 6-second intervals, blinked only when she chose to, and treated her sniper rifle like an extension of her own pulse. She was the kind of soldier who made war planners sleep easier and enemies sleep never. That morning, her blonde braid was tucked beneath her boonie hat, a few rebellious strands flicking in the mountain winds as she scanned the valley below. The convoy she'd been assigned to overwatch, 2nd Battalion, 135th Infantry, was already several miles into Devkar's safe corridor, a term she had never trusted. The path wound through a narrow canyon where the rock walls leaned in like eavesdroppers. Militias claimed the area, but so did every rumor of every ambush that had ever unraveled in operation. Lily had argued the night before that the corridor was too quiet, too clean, too complacent. But she was a sniper, not a commander, and so she watched from above as the long chain of vehicles crawled forward like ants unaware of the boot poised above them. At 0420, the comms shattered their silence. A burst of static, then shouts, then gunfire, sharp, panicked, overlapping like a fistful of firecrackers detonating all at once. Ambush, multiple hostiles, vehicle down, taking heavy, and then nothing. No final scream. No last call sign, no coordinates. Just the kind of silence that feels like a door slamming shut on 307 lives. Lily froze, not in fear, but in the absolute stillness that came before her mind kicked into its lethal precision. She cycled through radio frequencies, rerouted emergency bands, tried the battalion commander twice, the platoon sergeants 4 times, the convoy leader 5. Every attempt returned the same void. When she called it in, the operations center went eerily quiet on the other end. The major overseeing the mission spoke with the grim steadiness of a man reading a eulogy. "Harper, we've lost them." It was too early for the sun to shine, but somehow too late to pretend those words weren't final. Protocol dictated waiting for drone confirmation, waiting for reinforcements, waiting for intelligence teams to map enemy positions before sending anyone else into what was likely now a kill cage. Protocol dictated that Lily Harper remain at her overwatch, log the incident, and prepare for a retrieval mission that would not retrieve the living. But Lily had learned long ago that protocol was written by people who had never looked through a scope and watched a comrade bleed out while waiting for approval to save them. She stood slowly, slinging her rifle across her back. "Permission to deploy solo," she requested, her voice calm, respectful, and already halfway down the mountain. The major denied her immediately. "Negative. You stay put. We'll assemble a QRF at first light." First light. That was hours away. Hours they did not have. So Lily did the only thing Lily Harper had ever done when confronted with an order that contradicted her instincts. She followed the truth instead. She cut her radio, double-checked her ammunition, tightened the straps of her pack, and descended into the valley without a whisper of hesitation. Her boots barely disturbed the shale as she moved. The mountain winds howled warnings, but they howled in vain. Lily was already threading her way through goat trails and shadowed switchbacks, her breath an even metronome against the hostile silence. She followed signs no one else would have noticed: the faint drag of a blown tire, a boot print angled wrong, a piece of shattered window glass reflecting the moon just so. Every clue sharpened her focus, tightened her resolve. And then the first hostile appeared, silhouetted against a ridgeline. unaware that a ghost was now stalking the valley. Lily went prone without thought, her rifle kissing her shoulder like an old friend. One breath, one heartbeat, one squeeze. The man fell without sound, and Lily rose again, already moving. The sky was beginning to pale by the time she reached the mouth of the canyon. Smoke drifted like wounded spirits from the wreckage inside, curling through the air in thin gray tendrils. Abandoned gear lay scattered: helmets, torn medical bags, empty ammo belts, but no bodies, no blood trails, no fallen soldiers. It was as if the earth had swallowed them whole. Lily knelt, touching the dust where dozens of boots had been dragged in a single direction, uphill toward a ridge choked with dead brush. "They're alive," she whispered, not hopeful, but certain. She could read the terrain the way others read books. She could tell the difference between men who marched and men who were forced. And whoever had taken her battalion had done so swiftly, efficiently, like herding livestock. A lesser soldier would have turned back. A wiser soldier might have. But Lily Harper wasn't concerned with wisdom. She was concerned with truth. And the truth was that 300 men were somewhere beyond that ridge, wounded, outnumbered, written off as dead before sunrise. She rose, tightening her grip on her rifle. "Hold on," she murmured to the empty canyon. "I'm coming." And the mountains, for the first time that morning, seemed to listen. Lily Harper slipped deeper into the Devkur Mountains with the practiced silence of someone who had lived most of her adult life on the edge of danger, her movements so measured that even the wind seemed hesitant to disturb her. The tracks she followed grew fresher the farther she climbed. Drag marks, boot prints spaced too far apart to be voluntary, scuffs from rifle butts used as prods, and each scrap of evidence whispered the same truth. Her battalion had been taken alive, forced along a path no American unit should ever have traversed without artillery support or air on standby. But Lily knew the mountains better than the enemy expected a sniper to. She'd spent weeks on overwatch here, studying the contours of every ridge and the intricate web of goat trails and smuggler routes that threaded through the basalt cliffs like veins. The militants believed the terrain made them invisible. They hadn't accounted for someone like her. Someone who turned terrain into a language only she could read. As she moved, the silence around her changed, deepened, thickened, until she felt it pressing in like a second skin. The Devkur province was treacherous in daylight, but in the pre-dawn hours it became a living thing. Every ravine an open throat, every shadow a threat. Still, Lily pressed forward, temperature dropping around her as the elevation climbed. Her breath slow and controlled despite the beating in her chest. Halfway up a winding incline, she spotted the first sign of resistance. A lone sentry perched on an outcrop, scanning the valley below. He was young, jittery, fingers twitching against the trigger guard of his battered rifle. Lily flattened against the rock, unslinging her sniper rifle before the thought even formed. She didn't need a full minute to calculate wind rips or drop. She had been doing calculations in her head since she was 16, learning to shoot tin cans off fence posts in the Midwest. One shot, center mass, angled to avoid alerting anyone stationed farther upslope. She exhaled and squeezed the trigger. The man folded silently. Lily dragged him into the brush, confiscating his radio, ammo, and a hand-drawn map stuffed into his vest. The map confirmed what instinct had already told her. The militants were funneling their captives toward an abandoned mining compound carved into the side of the ridge, a place local villagers claimed was haunted by the spirits of men who died digging the tunnels decades before. Haunted or not, it was the perfect place to imprison a battalion. As Lily hiked the last stretch toward the compound, she kept low, weaving through sagebrush and volcanic rock until she crested a boulder shelf and finally saw it. A chain of rusted structures half-collapsed from time and neglect, flanked by ravines and jagged spurs of stone. Smoke rose from makeshift cooking fires, and scattered figures patrolled the perimeter. But what made Lily freeze was the yard at the center. Rows of exhausted, beaten soldiers, her soldiers, bound by the wrists with plastic restraints, guarded by nearly 50 armed militants. She saw the battalion commander, his face bruised, his uniform in tatters. She saw Specialist Perez from Recon clutching his ribs. She saw men she had eaten with, trained with, protected for months on Overwatch. Rage didn't flood Lily. Rage was too loud. Instead, a cold, Steady determination settled into her bones. She counted the militants, their positions, their weapons, their blind spots. She watched shift rotations, noticed where guards slowed their pace out of boredom, where perimeter lines faltered near the mining tunnels. She memorized every detail because she knew she wouldn't have a second chance. She waited until the darkest slice of night, the hour before dawn when exhaustion weighed heaviest on the untrained and only sharpened the senses of someone like her. Then she went to work. Lily positioned herself on an elevated ridge overlooking the compound, drawing a careful lattice of escape routes in her mind. She disabled 2 guards at the south gate with shots, timed so perfectly they sounded like the same bullet. Then she descended the slope, slipping behind the corrugated metal walls to cut the bindings of the first group of captives. Their eyes widened when they recognized her, but she pressed a finger to her lips, urging silence. She armed them with weapons scavenged from the fallen militants. "Move only on my signal," she whispered, voice low, steady, absolute. When one of the younger privates choked out, "We thought we were dead," Lily simply nodded toward the mountains. "Not today." She repeated the process across the yard, cutting restraints, gathering survivors, equipping them with whatever gear she could salvage. And then, just as the first hints of gray touched the horizon, one guard stumbled upon a group of freed soldiers. His shout split the air. Chaos erupted instantly. Lily responded faster than thought, rifle snapping upward, bullet carving through the guard's throat before the sound of his alarm had fully formed. The entire compound ignited in gunfire. Militants surged toward the prisoners. Freed soldiers scrambled toward cover. Lily climbed the nearest service ladder to regain elevation, picking targets with cold efficiency. Every shot counted. Every shot mattered. She dropped a machine gunner before he could mow down a group of wounded men scrambling across the yard. She clipped the kneecap of a militant sprinting to resecure the north tower. She neutralized threats so quickly the enemy believed they were under attack from multiple directions. But Lily wasn't shooting to kill. She was shooting to shepherd. Every bullet guided her battalion toward the only viable escape route, a narrow ravine behind the compound where the rock walls angled inward like protective arms. She covered the retreat relentlessly, her shoulder bruising from recoil, her heartbeat matching the cadence of each shot. The commander, limping heavily, reached her position last. "Harper," he gasped, staring at her in disbelief. "What the hell are you doing here?" Lily didn't look up from her scope. "Bringing you home, sir." Then she fired again, and again, and again. By the time the militants realized they were losing control, it was too late. Under Lily's guidance, the 307 men they had paraded into the mountains as trophies were now disappearing into the ravine like ghosts slipping through their fingers. When the last soldier vanished into the shadows, Lily rose, slung her rifle across her back, and followed them without a single backward glance. Because the mountains had thought they would keep their prisoners. But Lily Harper had other plans, and the mountains would learn they were not the only things capable of swallowing the enemy whole. By the time Staff Sergeant Lily Harper guided the last of the 307 men through the ravine and back into the open cradle of the lower valley, the sky had fully surrendered to dawn, bleeding gold and copper across the ridgelines like nature itself was paying tribute to their survival. The wounded leaned on the able, the exhausted leaned on determination, and all of them leaned on Lily, who walked at the rear with her rifle cradled low, scanning every ridge the way a mother wolf watches the tree, lined for predators, ready to bare her teeth the moment danger breathed wrong. They moved in a silent column, sunburned, bloodied, dehydrated, but alive, down the long slope that led to the outskirts of forward operating base Merritt. And when the first perimeter guard spotted them through binoculars, he froze so completely that the soldier beside him had to physically push him to snap him out of it. It was like watching ghosts walk out of their own graves, each face recognizable and impossible all at once. Within minutes, chaos broke loose across the base. Not panic, but a stunned, unfiltered surge of disbelief as the operations center sprinted outdoors. Medics sprinted for stretchers, and officers ran toward the gathering dust cloud with the kind of urgency normally reserved for mass casualty events. The chaplain, who had spent the night writing condolence letters for families who did not yet know their sons had been declared dead, dropped the pen from his fingers and whispered a short prayer, not of grief, but of pure astonishment. And then the battalion broke the tree line, emerging into full sunlight, squinting through the brightness like men trying to re-enter a world they'd been violently ripped from. At the front of them, limping heavily but upright, was the battalion commander, his voice hoarse when he shouted toward the stunned crowd, "Open the gates!" And behind him, as steady as the shadow of the mountains, was Lily Harper, dust smeared across her cheekbones, her blonde braid half unraveled, her rifle slung with effortless familiarity across her back. When they crossed into the wire, the cheering didn't begin all at once. It began as a small, trembling sound from a private who had been told his squad leader was dead, then grew into a roar that swallowed the entire base until everyone, clerks, mechanics, cooks, intel analysts, medics, stood with awe carved into their faces. Lily barely registered the noise. She was guiding a limping specialist to the triage line, helping a sergeant whose arm was mangled beyond simple field repair, handing water to a corporal who hadn't spoken in 2 days. She worked in silence until the major who had denied her request to advance appeared before her, breathless, shame clouding his features as heavily as the dust still clinging to her boots. "Harper," he managed, voice thick, I owe you." She cut him off with a shake of her head, not unkind, not disrespectful, but firm. "No, sir. Save it for the reports. The men needed someone. That's all." But the commander, her commander, heard that and stepped forward, gripping her shoulder with a gratitude so fierce it momentarily cracked the hardened veneer of combat fatigue. "She didn't just come for us," he corrected the major. "She brought us home." And that truth surged through the gathered crowd like electricity. Word spread faster than any radio transmission. It was Lily Harper, the sniper who never missed, who had descended into the mountains alone, dismantled a fortified militant compound with nothing but her rifle, her instincts, and a will that bent iron. Medics tended to the wounded, leaders regrouped their units, and the sun climbed higher, illuminating the surreal sight of 307 soldiers who were alive solely because Lily had refused to believe a silent radio meant a closed fate. Later that afternoon, once the wounded had been stabilized and the base had returned to an uneasy semblance of normal, the entire battalion assembled on the dirt parade ground. Not by order, not by protocol, by choice. Lily stepped forward reluctantly when called, uncomfortable in the spotlight, the weight of so many eyes heavier than the rifle she carried through the canyon. The commander's voice boomed across the ranks, raw emotion thick in every syllable as he recounted how she shadowed the battalion's tracks through hostile terrain, eliminated threats with surgical precision, infiltrated the mining compound, freed every prisoner, and fought a running gun battle through the mountains until the battalion emerged together, whole. When he finished, he did something no soldier there would ever forget. He rendered a crisp salute to her, an officer saluting an enlisted sniper, as the entire formation followed, hundreds of hands snapping to brows in perfect unison. Lily swallowed hard, her throat tight, and returned the salute with a steadiness that belied the storm inside her. She had never fought for recognition. She had fought because that was who she was, because leaving them behind wasn't an option she could live with. But the men knew better. They knew that courage came in many forms, and sometimes it wore a blonde braid and carried a rifle like an extension of the human soul. In the weeks that followed, stories spread across bases, then across commands, then across the world. They began calling the escape the March of the 307, though among the soldiers who lived it, a different name took hold. Harper's Ghost Walk, a tribute to the sniper who moved unseen, unheard, unstoppable. And on the sleeve of every soldier in the battalion, a small unofficial patch began to appear. A single bullet, a mountain ridge, and the words, "She brought US back." Lily never asked for it, never wore it herself, but whenever she saw one, a quiet understanding passed between her and the men she had saved, a bond forged in the silent dark of the Devkar Mountains where she had fought not just for their lives, but for the right for them to keep telling their stories. She had walked into the valley alone, but she had not walked back alone. She brought them home, and that was a truth no mountain could ever swallow.